Timothy Hayes sat alone in his small apartment, staring at the stack of unpaid bills on the table. The room was quiet, but his mind was loud, filled with doubt, fear, and excuses. He whispered to himself, "Why can't I stay consistent? Why do I always start strong and then fall back into the same habits?" What Timothy didn't know was that his life was about to change. Not because of luck. Not because of talent. But because of a single discovery. One principle that Napoleon Hill once called the master key to success. That principle was discipline. Scene 1. The meeting that changed everything. One Saturday morning, Timothy wandered into a dusty old bookstore downtown. The place smelled of old paper and wood polish. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, just an escape from his restless thoughts. At the back of the store, hidden between forgotten titles, he found a worn-out copy of Think and Grow Rich. The edges were torn, and the pages yellowed, but when he opened the first chapter, a line leapt out at him. "Self-discipline is the master key to riches." The words gripped him. He bought the book for $2 and carried it home. That night, instead of numbing himself with television, Timothy read until midnight. With every page, it felt as if Hill was speaking directly to him, urging him to take control of the one thing he had always ignored, his own mind. Scene 2. The wake-up call. Timothy began to realize something uncomfortable. His failures weren't because life was unfair. They weren't because he lacked opportunities. They happened because he lacked discipline. He thought about the times he had started exercising but quit after a week, the times he promised himself to save money but spent it on impulse, the times he wanted to write a book but never got past the first page. Napoleon Hill wrote that without discipline, ambition is nothing but a wish. Timothy felt that truth sting. He had been wishing for success his whole life but had never built the habits to support it. That night, he made a promise. "No more drifting. From tomorrow, I take command of myself." Scene 3. First battle with the mind. The next morning, Timothy's alarm rang at 5:30 a.m. His first test had arrived. His bed was warm, his body heavy, and the thought of staying under the blanket whispered like a siren. But then he remembered Hill's words. "He who masters himself becomes the master of his destiny." Timothy swung his legs out of bed and stood up. It was a small victory, but it felt like conquering a mountain. He realized that discipline isn't about one grand act. It's about small decisions, made consistently, that build strength over time. That day, he went for a short walk. He wrote a single page in his notebook. He skipped the junk food he usually bought on his way to work. None of these acts were huge, but they marked the beginning of his transformation. Scene 4. The sculptor's lesson. Later that week, Timothy returned to the bookstore and struck up a conversation with the owner, an older man named Mr. Grant. His eyes were sharp, and his voice carried the weight of experience. "You know," Mr. Grant said, "discipline is like sculpting. The marble doesn't shape itself. The sculptor chips away, stroke by stroke, until the masterpiece appears. Most people never pick up the chisel. They let distractions and comfort keep them from their potential." Timothy nodded, feeling the truth of those words. He began to see himself as that sculptor, and his life as the block of marble waiting to be shaped. Scene 5. The compass in the fog. The following week tested him again. Work piled up. Friends invited him out for late nights. Distractions buzzed around him like mosquitoes. But Timothy remembered what he had read. Discipline is the compass that guides you through the fog of distraction. So he stayed steady. He blocked out an hour each morning to work on himself before the world demanded his attention. That 1 hour became his sacred time to exercise, journal, and read. Slowly, his confidence grew. Scene 6. Resilience in the fire. One evening, Timothy hit his first setback. He had promised himself he would write daily, but after a long day at work, he collapsed on the couch and didn't touch his notebook. Guilt gnawed at him. The next morning, the old Timothy would have said, "See, I failed again. I'll never change." But this time, he remembered another lesson from Napoleon Hill. Discipline does not demand perfection. It demands persistence. So instead of giving up, Timothy doubled his effort the next day. He wrote 2 pages instead of 1. He learned that resilience, getting back up after a fall, was the true test of discipline. Closing of Part 1, the awakening weeks passed, and Timothy began to notice changes. His mornings were no longer chaotic. His mind felt sharper. His days had a new sense of direction. He realized something profound. Discipline wasn't a cage that restricted him. It was the key that set him free from procrastination, from regret, from wasted potential. For the first time in his life, Timothy felt he was steering the ship instead of drifting with the tide. And he knew this was just the beginning, because once a man takes command of his mind, his future opens like a horizon without limits. Word count 1020. This draft reframes your material into a narrative style with Timothy as the central character, blending Napoleon Hill's teachings into his journey. It's written for an American audience in simple, engaging language. Recommendation: use Timothy's story as the recurring thread through all 6 parts. Next step: develop Part 2, where Timothy learns how to control his thoughts and environment, mind mastery. Part 2, the storms that shape you. The hook. The rain hammered against Timothy Hayes's window as if the sky itself was testing him. He sat at his desk, head in his hands, feeling the weight of failure pressing down. The project he had been working on for weeks had collapsed. His boss was disappointed. His savings account was shrinking. For a moment, the old Timothy returned, the one who always gave up when things got hard. But then, almost like a whisper, he remembered the words he had underlined in Think and Grow Rich. Every adversity carries with it the seed of an equal or greater benefit. He sat up straight. Maybe this storm wasn't here to destroy him. Maybe it was here to teach him. Scene 1. Meeting the mentor again. A few days later, Timothy returned to Mr. Grant's bookstore. The old man noticed a look of defeat in his eyes and asked, "What's troubling you, son?" Timothy explained everything: the failed project, the stress, the doubts. Mr. Grant listened quietly, then said, "Adversity is not your enemy. It is your greatest teacher. Through it you discover the depth of your strength. Without the storm, the tree never grows deep roots." Timothy thought about that on his way home. Perhaps failure wasn't the end. Perhaps it was a stepping stone. Scene 2. The power of purpose. That night, Timothy opened his notebook and wrote a question at the top of the page. What do I really want? He had never truly asked himself that before. He thought success meant earning more money or having people respect him. But Hill's book challenged him to define a clear purpose. What is the legacy I want to leave behind? He wrote. For hours, Timothy scribbled ideas until one vision became clear. He wanted to build a business that inspired others to grow, just as this old book was inspiring him. He didn't know the details yet, but he knew this. Without purpose, discipline has no direction. He realized that discipline was the bridge, but goals were the destination. Scene 3. The architect's lesson. A week later, Timothy met Mr. Grant again. The bookstore owner drew a rough sketch of a house on the back of a receipt. Before a single brick is laid, he explained, an architect has a blueprint. Without it, the workers would just stack stones in chaos. Your goals are your blueprint. Discipline is the construction crew. Without goals, discipline has nothing to build. Timothy finally understood. His daily habits weren't random acts of willpower. They were bricks. Each action placed him closer to his blueprint. Scene 4. Building habits like a blacksmith, Timothy decided to change the way he lived. He woke up earlier. He started reading every morning, journaling his thoughts, and exercising. At first, it felt awkward, like wearing shoes that didn't fit. But he remembered Hill's lesson. Discipline is built through repetition. What begins as effort becomes habit, and habit becomes destiny. He thought of a blacksmith hammering steel. One strike didn't shape the blade, it was the rhythm of thousands. Likewise, one day of discipline wouldn't transform him, but repeated daily effort would. So, Timothy built his life on small but powerful habits. Scene 5. The battle with time. Even as his habits grew stronger, Timothy struggled with time. Work drained him, distractions pulled at him, and evenings disappeared into meaningless scrolling. One morning, frustrated, he slammed his phone on the table and muttered, "I'm wasting my life." Later that day, Mr. Grant reminded him of something powerful. Time is your greatest asset. You can lose money and earn it back, but once an hour is gone, it never returns. Master your time, and you master your life. Timothy began guarding his hours like treasure. He created a daily routine, a morning of study and exercise, an evening of writing and reflection. Each day had a structure. No more drifting. Scene 6. The power of routine. At first, Timothy felt restricted by the routine. But soon, he noticed something surprising. He had more energy, not less. His mind was calmer. His focus sharper. He remembered reading about Benjamin Franklin, who began each morning with the question, "What good shall I do this day?" Franklin's greatness wasn't an accident. It was built on disciplined routines. Timothy smiled. He now understood what Hill meant when he said, "Discipline thrives on structure." His routine wasn't a prison. It was a foundation. Scene 7. The test of distraction. One Friday night, Timothy's friends called him out to party. The old Timothy would have joined without hesitation. But this time, he paused. He looked at the blueprint of his goals taped above his desk. He asked himself, "Does this bring me closer to my vision, or farther away?" The answer was clear. He stayed home, wrote 2 pages in his notebook, and went to bed early. It wasn't easy, but he felt a sense of pride the next morning. For the first time, he wasn't reacting to life, he was directing it. Closing of Part 2. A new foundation. Weeks turned into months, and Timothy's life slowly transformed. He was not perfect. He still stumbled. But each time, he returned to his purpose, his goals, his habits, and his routine. He realized that adversity didn't come to destroy him, it came to strengthen him. Goals gave him direction. Habits gave him consistency. Routine gave him power over his day. And through it all, discipline held everything together like steel beams in a great building. Timothy no longer felt like a man drifting at the mercy of the winds. He felt like a captain steering his ship with a clear map, a strong crew, and the resilience to weather any storm. This was only the beginning. For discipline had given him something far greater than results. It had given him control of his destiny. Word count 1030. This draft weaves your provided material into a story-driven narrative with Timothy facing adversity, discovering the role of goals, habits, time, and routine. It reflects Napoleon Hill's philosophy in plain, American-style storytelling. Recommendation: continue Timothy's journey in Part 3 with the theme of choosing your energy, creating before consuming, movement, and intentional eating. Next step: develop Part 3 in the same narrative flow. Part 3. The Guardian within the hook. Timothy sat in a quiet cafe on a rainy evening, staring at the glowing screen of his phone. Notifications buzzed. Friends laughed at a table nearby. A half-written plan sat in his notebook, untouched. He felt the tug of temptation, the urge to scroll, to drift, to give in to comfort. But then a thought struck him like lightning. If I cannot control myself, how can I control my future? That moment marked the beginning of Timothy's greatest lesson. Discipline is not only about action. It is about guarding the mind, the hours, the focus, and the choices that shape destiny. Scene 1. The lesson of self-control. One evening, Timothy visited Mr. Grant at the bookstore again. The old man listened patiently as Timothy described his daily battles with distractions, cravings, and wasted hours. Mr. Grant nodded slowly and said, "Discipline cannot survive without self-control. It is the gatekeeper of the mind. Every time you give in to a whim, you weaken your foundation. But each time you resist, you grow stronger." He paused, then added, "History's greatest leaders won their first battles not on the field, but within themselves." Timothy went home that night reflecting on Alexander the Great, who conquered nations but first mastered restraint. He realized his own victories would not come from grand achievements, but from small choices made each day. Scene 2. The crossroads of choice. The next morning, Timothy faced his test. He woke up tired, tempted to skip his workout. He stood at the crossroads, indulgence or discipline. He remembered Mr. Grant's words. Every decision is a vote for your future self. With effort, he put on his shoes and went for a run. The air was cold, his legs heavy, but with every step he felt stronger. He knew he had chosen the harder path, the path that built his future brick by brick. That day, Timothy understood, self-control wasn't about denial. It was about freedom, the freedom to choose his destiny instead of being ruled by impulses. Scene 3. Time, the currency of life. Weeks later, Timothy found himself frustrated again. No matter how disciplined he tried to be, time slipped away. Hours vanished into distractions, and progress felt slow. He returned to the bookstore for advice. Mr. Grant pulled out an old pocket watch and placed it on the table. "Time," he said, "is the most valuable resource you own. Lose money and you can earn it back. Lose time, and it is gone forever. Discipline lives or dies by how you use your hours." The words struck Timothy hard. He had been careless with his time, treating it as endless. That day, he made a vow to guard his hours as a banker guards gold. He began mapping his days with purpose. Each morning, he listed priorities. Each evening, he reviewed them. Slowly, his wasted hours turned into stepping stones toward his vision. Scene 4. The power of focus. Even with time managed, Timothy found his mind wandering. Social media, noise, endless tasks, all pulled him away from his goals. One afternoon, Mr. Grant handed him a magnifying glass. "Sunlight is everywhere," he said, "but when focused through a lens, it ignites fire. Your mind works the same way. Scattered thoughts are weak. Focused thoughts are unstoppable." Timothy carried the lesson home. He silenced distractions, shut off his phone during work, and gave himself fully to one task at a time. For the first time, he felt the sharp power of focus. Projects once abandoned came to life. Goals once blurred grew clear. He realized focus was not just attention, it was intention. Scene 5. The power of decision. But even as Timothy grew stronger in self-control, time, and focus, he faced another weakness: hesitation. He doubted himself, delayed choices, and lost momentum. Mr. Grant reminded him, "Procrastination is the silent killer of dreams. Indecision steals more futures than failure ever could." Timothy began training himself to decide quickly and act with conviction. When faced with opportunities, he asked, "Does this serve my purpose?" If the answer was yes, he acted. If no, he let it go. He discovered that decisive action gave him energy, while hesitation drained it. Each decision became a brick, building the structure of his future. Scene 6. The quiet power of consistency. Months passed. Timothy had faced failures, temptations, and doubts, but one truth stood above all: greatness was not built in bursts of effort. It was built in quiet, consistent action. Each day he read, he grew wiser. Each workout strengthened him. Each journal entry clarified his vision. None of these acts were dramatic, but together they transformed him. One evening, as Timothy reviewed his notebook, he saw the pattern. Discipline was not about rare moments of inspiration. It was about daily choices, repeated without fail. Consistency was the silent builder of greatness. He realized his journey was not about perfection, but persistence. Each day was another chance to choose discipline, to honor his purpose, to move one step closer to mastery. Closing of Part 3, The Guardian Within. By now, Timothy had learned that discipline was more than willpower. It was guarded by self-control, strengthened by focus, executed through time management, sharpened by decision, and sustained through consistency. He no longer felt like a man battling chaos. He felt like an architect shaping his future, brick by brick, day by day. The storms of temptation still came, but Timothy had built walls strong enough to withstand them. His guardian, self-control, stood watch over his mind, his hours, and his choices. And so, Timothy stepped into a new chapter of his journey, not just disciplined in action, but disciplined in spirit. For he had discovered the greatest truth of all: when you command yourself, you command your world. Word count 1020. This draft recasts your material into a 6-part story-driven narrative around Timothy's growth. It frames self-control, time, focus, decision, and consistency as stages of his journey, told in plain American English in the Napoleon Hill tradition. Recommendation: continue Timothy's story in Part 4 with the themes of choosing your energy, creating before consuming, movement, and intentional eating. Next step: develop Part 4 in narrative style with another 1,000-word chapter. Part 4: The Dawn of Energy. The hook. The alarm rang at 6 a.m. Timothy groaned, tempted to sink back into the warmth of his bed. His body begged for rest, his mind whispered excuses. Yet, deep inside, a voice challenged him. The way you begin your morning sets the tone for your destiny. That day, Timothy would discover that discipline was not only about self-control and focus. It was about energy, the force that fuels every action, decision, and achievement. And Napoleon Hill's wisdom would guide him to master it. Scene 1. The choice of energy. One rainy morning, Timothy returned to the bookstore. Mr. Grant, as always, was waiting with a gentle smile. "Tell me," the old man asked, "how do you start your days?" Timothy admitted he often reached for his phone, scrolled through messages, and drifted in distraction. He confessed he felt drained before the day even began. Mr. Grant leaned closer. "Energy is not given. It is chosen. Each morning you can feed your spirit with purpose, or poison it with noise. The successful do not wait for energy, they create it." The words struck Timothy. He realized his mornings were not neutral. They were the foundation of his destiny. Scene 2. Creating before consuming. The next day, Timothy fought the urge to grab his phone. Instead, he opened his notebook and wrote a single question at the top of the page. What will I create today? At first, the blank page intimidated him. But slowly, ideas flowed. He outlined a business plan. He sketched a design. He drafted a letter he had postponed. By the time the world stirred awake, Timothy had already created something of value. He felt alive, energized, and focused. He understood Mr. Grant's lesson. When you create before you consume, you control your mind instead of letting the world control it. Scene 3. Movement. The silent few weeks later, Timothy found himself restless again. Though his mornings were improving, his body felt heavy, his mind sluggish. He returned to Mr. Grant for guidance. The old man handed him a worn book on the power of movement. "The body," he said, "is the engine of the mind. A strong spirit cannot live in a neglected vessel. Move your body, and you awaken your power." The next morning, Timothy laced his shoes and went for a run. His lungs burned, his legs ached, but as the sweat poured, his energy lifted. He returned home sharper, stronger, alive. Day after day, he committed to movement, sometimes a run, sometimes stretching, sometimes lifting weights. Each time, he felt the connection. Discipline of the body created discipline of the mind. Scene 4. Eating with intention. Even with exercise, Timothy noticed that some days he was sharp, while others he felt dull and tired. The difference, he realized, came from his choices at the table. Mr. Grant explained, "Food is not only for taste. It is fuel. Eat carelessly, and your energy will betray you. Eat with intention, and your body will serve your vision." Timothy began paying attention. Instead of rushing through meals or indulging in comfort food, he chose simple, nourishing options. Fresh fruits, lean meals, water instead of endless cups of coffee. At first, it felt ordinary, even boring. But soon he noticed he no longer suffered afternoon crashes. His focus sharpened. His willpower grew stronger. He realized discipline was not only in what he did, but also in what he allowed into his body. Scene 5. Guarding the morning mind. One Saturday, Timothy slipped. He stayed up late the night before, and when morning came, he grabbed his phone out of habit. Minutes turned into an hour of scrolling. By noon, he felt behind, distracted, and frustrated. That evening, he confessed his failure to Mr. Grant. The old man did not scold him. Instead, he said, "A mind is like a garden. In the morning it is most fertile. If you plant weeds, news, noise, gossip, those weeds grow fast. But if you plant seeds of purpose, reading, writing, reflection, you harvest wisdom." Timothy never forgot that lesson. He began guarding his morning mind like treasure. Before speaking to the world, he spoke to himself. Before absorbing distractions, he set his intentions. He realized mornings were sacred. They were the opening chapter of each day, and only he could choose how to write them. Scene 6. The ripple of energy. As months passed, Timothy noticed something remarkable. His mornings no longer belonged to chance. He woke with purpose, created before consuming, moved his body, ate with intention, and guarded his mind. The result was not only energy. It was transformation. His work improved. His relationships grew stronger. His confidence deepened. People around him noticed the change and asked him his secret. He smiled, knowing it was not one habit, but the harmony of them all. Timothy had learned that energy was not a gift of luck. It was a discipline, built choice by choice, morning by morning. Closing of Part 4, The Dawn of Energy. Looking back, Timothy saw how far he had come. In the beginning, he was a man drifting, exhausted, distracted, and unsure. Now he felt alive, in control, and full of purpose. He understood Napoleon Hill's timeless truth: success begins in the mind, but it is powered by energy. And so, Timothy made a vow: never again would he waste his mornings, poison his body, or neglect his spirit. He would live each day as if it were the seed of his destiny. For he now knew, the way you rise shapes the way you live. And the way you live shapes the life you leave behind. Word count 10:15. This part frames Timothy's growth around energy, creation, movement, nutrition, and intentional mornings in a narrative arc tied to Napoleon Hill's teachings. Recommendation. In Part 5, expand into themes of definiteness of purpose and building burning desire, where Timothy begins pursuing a larger vision with clarity. Next step. Draft Part 5 as a 1,000-word story in the same style. Part 5. The Fire of Purpose. The Hook. Timothy sat at his desk one quiet evening, staring at his neatly organized notebook. His mornings were strong, his energy sharper than ever, yet a gnawing question haunted him. But what am I moving toward? He realized discipline, energy, and good habits were powerful, but without a clear direction, they were like a ship sailing the ocean without a compass. That night, Timothy would uncover Napoleon Hill's most powerful truth. Success begins with a definiteness of purpose, a burning desire that directs every thought, choice, and action. Scene 1. A restless mind. Despite his progress, Timothy often felt scattered. Some days he wanted to start a business. Other days he dreamed of writing a book. At times he even thought of traveling the world. When he shared this with Mr. Grant, the old man leaned back and smiled knowingly. "You remind me of a traveler I once met," Mr. Grant said. "He walked 10 miles one way, then turned around and walked 10 miles the other. At the end of the day, he was exhausted, but still in the same place." Timothy chuckled, realizing the traveler was himself. He was moving, but not moving forward. "Until you decide where you're going," Mr. Grant continued, "you will never get there." Scene 2. The Power of a Burning Desire. One evening, Mr. Grant placed a book in Timothy's hands. Inside was a passage that changed everything. "Whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe, it can achieve. But first, he must have a burning desire." Timothy whispered the words again. Burning desire. "What's the difference between a wish and a burning desire?" Timothy asked. Mr. Grant replied, "A wish is like a candle in the wind, easily blown out. A burning desire is like a fire in the furnace. It grows hotter the more it is fed. Wishes fade. Desires endure." Timothy understood. His problem was not lack of discipline, but lack of a fire to direct it. Scene 3. Finding his purpose. That night, Timothy sat alone in his small apartment, notebook open before him. He asked himself a question he had never dared to write down. What do I want most in this world? At first, the answers came vague: security, success, respect. But he dug deeper. He remembered his childhood, the small town where opportunities were few, the faces of young men who gave up before they began. He remembered his father's struggles, his mother's quiet sacrifices. And then it came to him. He wanted to build something that proved ordinary men could rise above their circumstances. His pen shook as he wrote his statement of purpose. "I will build a business that not only gives me freedom but also creates opportunities for others to grow. I will be an example of what is possible when a man lives with discipline, energy, and purpose." For the first time, he felt the fire in his chest. He had not just a goal, but a mission. Scene 4. The Test of Desire. The next morning, Timothy awoke with unusual excitement. He began mapping out steps toward his dream. He researched industries, studied successful entrepreneurs, and began saving money with intention. But the universe tested him. An old friend invited him into a quick money scheme that promised fast returns. Another opportunity came for a high-paying job in a field he disliked. Temptations pulled at him, whispering, "This is easier. This is safer." He struggled. He almost gave in. But then he remembered Mr. Grant's words. "A burning desire endures." He returned to his written purpose, read it aloud, and felt the fire rise again. He realized true desire was not about ease, it was about commitment. Scene 5. The Vision. In writing. One afternoon, Timothy brought his notebook to Mr. Grant and read his purpose aloud. The old man nodded in approval. "You have taken the first step," he said. "But words written once are not enough. Repeat them until they become part of your spirit. Speak them until your heart believes." For what you tell yourself daily, you become. From that day on, Timothy made it his ritual. Each morning, after waking, he read his purpose aloud. Each night, before sleep, he repeated it again. The words etched themselves into his soul. Slowly, he began to see the world differently. Opportunities that aligned with his visions seemed to appear. Distractions lost their power. His decisions grew clearer. Scene 6. Fueling the fire. As weeks passed, Timothy's desire grew stronger. He noticed something remarkable. His energy was no longer only from habits, but from passion. Work that once felt draining now felt exciting. Challenges that once discouraged him became fuel for growth. Napoleon Hill's teaching echoed in his mind. Weak desires bring weak results. Strong desires bring strong results. Timothy realized the truth. When a man has a burning desire, obstacles become stepping stones. Without it, even the smallest difficulty becomes a wall. Scene 7. Sharing the vision. One evening, Timothy gathered a few close friends. For the first time, he spoke openly about his dream of building a business that empowered others. At first, his friends were skeptical. Some laughed. One even said, "Tim, don't get your hopes up. Life doesn't work that way." The words stung, but he did not waver. He had learned that most people doubted not because they were cruel, but because they had let their own dreams die. Instead of arguing, Timothy smiled and said, "You'll see." Inside, the fire burned brighter. Scene 8. The transformation. Months later, Timothy looked back at his old self, the man who drifted through mornings, distracted and unsure. That man was gone. In his place stood someone with discipline, energy, and above all, purpose. He now woke with direction, worked with clarity, and faced challenges with resilience. Even on hard days, his purpose pulled him forward. Timothy understood at last. Habits gave him strength, but purpose gave him destiny. Closing of Part 5. The fire of purpose. As he sat by the window one night, watching the city lights, Timothy whispered his purpose once more. He felt a calm certainty he had never known. He knew his journey was just beginning. There would be failures, struggles, and tests. But none of that mattered. For he had something stronger than obstacles. He had a burning desire that would not be extinguished. And so, Timothy closed his notebook and whispered to himself, "I know where I'm going. And nothing can stop me." Word count 10:10. This part deepens Timothy's journey into Napoleon Hill's principle of definiteness of purpose and burning desire, showing how he moves from scattered wishes to a clear mission that fuels his discipline and habits. Backhand index pointing right. Next, Part 6 should focus on faith and belief. How Timothy learns to trust his vision even before results appear, reinforcing Napoleon Hill's thoughts become things principle. Would you like me to draft Part 6 now, continuing in the same story-driven, simple style? Part 6. The final lesson, faith in action. The hook. Timothy had learned discipline, the power of energy, and the fire of purpose. Yet as he stood at the threshold of his new life, doubt still whispered in his ear. What if I fail? He realized one final principle was missing, the one Napoleon Hill called the bridge between dreams and reality, faith. Without it, his purpose would remain only words. With it, he could move mountains. Scene 1. Shadows of doubt. Weeks passed. Timothy had written his purpose daily, spoken it aloud, and taken steady steps toward building his business. Yet each time he hit a setback, a supplier backed out, a partner hesitated, or money grew tight, fear crept in. What if I'm not meant for this? He thought. What if everyone who doubted me was right? Mr. Grant, noticing Timothy's unease, spoke softly one evening. Discipline gives you strength. Desire gives you fire. But faith, Timothy, faith is what keeps you standing when storms come. Scene 2. The invisible bridge. They sat in the old study, the smell of books thick in the air. Mr. Grant opened one of his worn volumes and read, "Faith is the head chemist of the mind. When faith is mixed with desire, the subconscious mind takes over and creates reality." Timothy frowned. "But how do I believe when results haven't come yet?" Mr. Grant closed the book. "Faith is not belief after proof. Faith is belief before proof. Imagine you are standing at the edge of a canyon. You cannot see the bridge, but you step forward because you know it is there. That step is faith." Timothy's chest tightened. He realized he had been waiting for certainty before moving forward. But certainty never comes, only faith does. Scene 3. Planting faith through repetition. Determined to grow his faith, Timothy committed to a new practice. Each morning, after reading his purpose aloud, he now added words of belief. "I believe in myself. I believe in my purpose. I believe the universe is shaping circumstances in my favor." At first, it felt strange, even forced. But day after day, the repetition began to sink into his spirit. He started to feel lighter, stronger, more sure. Napoleon Hill's words echoed. "Repetition of affirmation of orders to your subconscious mind is the only known method of voluntary development of the emotion of faith." Timothy understood. Faith was not something you waited for. It was something you built. Scene 4. The storm test. Soon, his new faith was tested. A critical deal for his business collapsed. Investors withdrew. For 2 days, Timothy felt the old fear return. That night, he sat staring at his notebook, trembling. His vision seemed to flicker like a candle about to die. But then he remembered Mr. Grant's voice. "Faith is belief before proof." He picked up his notebook and read his purpose aloud, louder this time. His voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I believe. I will not stop. My dream will live." Tears burned in his eyes, but something inside shifted. Instead of giving up, he made new calls the next morning, reached out to different partners, and found unexpected support. His faith had turned despair into action. Scene 5. Seeing beyond the present. Weeks later, Timothy began noticing how faith shaped his perspective. When doors closed, he no longer saw dead ends. He saw redirection. When people doubted him, he no longer felt small. He saw proof that his dream was bigger than their imagination. When money was short, he no longer panicked. He reminded himself, resources follow vision. Faith gave him new eyes, not to see what was, but what could be. Scene 6. The invisible support. One evening, Timothy sat with Mr. Grant again. "You've changed," the old man observed. "I see it in your eyes. What once worried you now fuels you." Timothy nodded. "I used to think faith was something you had or didn't have. But now I see, it's something you practice until it becomes part of you." Mr. Grant smiled. "And when a man has faith, he is never alone. Circumstances align. People appear. Even failures become servants. The world bends to the one who believes." Timothy felt a quiet certainty fill him. He was no longer walking alone. His dream, once fragile, now had unseen strength behind it. Scene 7. The first breakthrough. Months later, Timothy secured his first major partnership. The business began to grow. It was still small, still fragile, but alive. He remembered the nights of doubt, the storms that nearly broke him. And he realized, it was not discipline alone, not desire alone, but faith that had carried him here. Faith had given him the courage to act when nothing made sense. Faith had turned his words into belief, and belief into reality. Scene 8. Passing the torch. One afternoon, a young man approached Timothy after hearing him speak about his journey. "Sir," the boy asked, "how did you keep going when things looked impossible?" Timothy smiled, recognizing his younger self in the boy's eyes. I wrote down my purpose. I repeated it every day. I trained myself to believe before the results came. That is how faith is built. And once you have faith, nothing can stop you. The boy nodded slowly, hope flickering in his eyes. Timothy realized he had become to others what Mr. Grant had been to him, a guide. Scene 9. Full circle. On a quiet evening, Timothy visited Mr. Grant's home. The old man was frail now, but his eyes still sparkled. "You've done well," Mr. Grant whispered. "You have lived Napoleon Hill's truth, not just read it. Discipline, energy, purpose, and now faith. With these, no dream is out of reach." Timothy clasped his mentor's hand. "I couldn't have done it without your guidance." Mr. Grant shook his head. "No, Timothy. You did it because you believed." Closing of Part 6. Faith in Action. That night, Timothy stood by his window, looking out at the city lights just as he had months ago. But this time, the view was different, not because the city had changed, but because he had died. He whispered his purpose once more. Only now, the words were not just ink on paper. They were alive in him, for he had learned the final lesson: faith is not waiting for proof. Faith is acting as if the proof is already here. And in that action, the proof appears. With discipline, energy, purpose, and faith, Timothy was no longer drifting through life. He was a creator of it. And so, his story closed not with an ending, but with a beginning. Proof that Napoleon Hill's timeless principles, when lived, could turn any man's dream into reality. This final part completes Timothy's journey by embedding Napoleon Hill's principle of faith, belief before proof, showing his full transformation from uncertainty to purposeful, confident living. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more life-changing lessons. Please like, share, and leave your comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and how you'll apply Napoleon Hill's principles in your own journey.